Yes, at the moment when you look at the government, or particularly the Chancellor and economic policy, it's kind of walking off the edge of a cliff. It knows it's doing so, and yet it can't think of anything else to do. It's got into a position you've seen last week, these latest polls, where Labour was down to 15% and fourth behind not just Reform, indeed less than half the polling of Reform, but behind not just the Tories, but behind the Greens as well. And that's before the tax rises. And everywhere you look, where politicians have been elected promising not to increase taxes and then do the exact opposite of what they promised big time, George Bush, the first, of course, being the most famous example of that, the electorate takes a penalty from them. The electorate takes it out on them. And when you're already down to 15% on the polls, how much further have you got to fall by raising taxes even more? And yet she's between a rock and a hard place on her fiscal sums. She has to do something. And the only way you raise a lot of money is you either raise income tax, or you raise VAT, or you raise national insurance, of which she's already done a bit of that. So she's in an impossible position. And I think she is the fall guy of this government. I think she'll be gone before spring is out, because by early this year it will become apparent that this budget is even more disastrous than our first budget, and Labour support will be in freefall.
Good day to you all, and welcome back to the British Report. If you thought the only thing colder than a British winter was the reception for the latest energy bills, wait until you hear what Andrew Neil just did to the occupants of number 10. We have seen some brutal political takedowns in our time, but this was a metaphorical 12-round heavyweight bout where the Prime Minister didn't even make it past the weigh-in. Andrew Neil, the man whose eyebrows have more investigative authority than most of the civil service, has just delivered a blistering verdict on the Starmer-Reeves double act that has left Westminster in absolute stasis. He isn't just critiquing a policy, he is sounding the death knell for the adults in the room narrative. If you wanted to see the exact moment a government's economic credibility officially evaporated, you are looking at it. Quick favour, if you are loving this, hit that subscribe button. Over 92% of viewers haven't yet. It is free. It takes a second and means the world to us. Thanks if you did. Now back to the show. Now let us get into the meat of this demolition. Andrew Neil, writing with the kind of sharp-tongued precision that makes a scalpel look like a butter knife, has warned that 2026 should be a year of recovery, but only if the dead hands of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves don't choke the life out of it first. Neil pointed out that the global stars are actually aligning for Britain. We have a massive global glut of oil and gas on the horizon, largely thanks to a production surge from the US and Saudi Arabia, which should be driving our energy prices through the floor. We have cheap Chinese imports, everything from solar panels to electric vehicle batteries, that should be acting as a natural fire extinguisher for inflation. But Neil's point is as simple as it is terrifying. Starmer and Reeves are the only ones standing in the way of this rosy scenario. He describes their leadership as enterprise-sapping tutelage and labels the Labour Party with having congenital economic ignorance. It is the political equivalent of inheriting a Ferrari and deciding the best way to make it go faster is to fill the fuel tank with lukewarm porridge and apply the handbrake. Neil argues that any good news we see in 2026 won't be because of the government, but in spite of it. While the rest of the world prepares for a stimulus-free revival, Britain is being dragged back by what he calls a bigger public sector, higher taxes and more public spending. But it isn't just the broadcasters and columnists who are turning the screw. The public has officially moved from disappointed to openly loathing the leadership.
Oh, yes. Well, at the moment, Rachel Reeves is Keir Starmer's air raid shelter. And if you get rid of the air raid shelter, you're exposed to dropping bombs coming down on your head. And I think there's every chance that she'll be gone early in the new year as the unpopularity of the budget sinks in, and that he'll be gone by the very latest after the May elections, which in Scotland, England, and Wales will be disastrous for him. So I think it's looking very grim. And of course, a change of leadership probably isn't going to change that much. But he is deeply unpopular now, not just in the country, but deeply unpopular within his own party. And although I think the wiser Labour MPs think, we can change the leadership, probably still won't make that much difference, they still just want rid of him. They just want to change and see what have they got to lose. Because At the moment, around 2/3 of the Parliamentary Labour Party at the next election is heading for the knackers yard. So what have you got to lose by trying something different?
If the economic forecast is grim, the popularity polls are positively subterranean. We are looking at a record-breaking level of public disdain. According to recent Ipsos data, Sir Keir Starmer's net approval rating has cratered to -66. To put that into perspective, that is lower than Tony Blair after the Iraq War, lower than Boris Johnson during the height of Partygate, and remarkably, lower than Liz Truss, just as the lettuce was preparing its victory speech. Starmer has managed to become the most unpopular Prime Minister in the history of modern polling. It is a feat of such magnitude that you almost have to admire the sheer scale of the failure. And then we have the Iron Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Her approval rating has hit a record low of -60. Even George Osborne, the architect of the austerity years that Labour spent a decade campaigning against, never reached these depths of public hostility. Luke Trial from the organisation More in Common has noted that in focus groups, the sentiment is no longer just disagreement, it is loathing. People are calling Starmer a liar, who said whatever was necessary to win, while Reeves is being viewed as uncaring, a chancellor who targets those who simply cannot fight back. The securenomics she promised is beginning to feel a lot more like insecurenomics for the average British household. This raises a massive question. Is the problem just a few bad policies, or is it a fundamental lack of understanding of how the real world actually functions? Andrew Neil's critique hits so hard because it targets the very soul of the Starmer project, the idea of competence. For years we were told that once the grown-ups took over, the chaos would stop and the economy would naturally heal. Instead, Neil argues, we have a government addicted to borrowing and high taxes that is actually pushing inflation up while the rest of the world is seeing it fall. He points out that while Eurozone inflation is hitting targets, Britain is lagging behind because of reckless borrowing and big wage rises that the private sector simply cannot sustain. It is a textbook case, as Neil suggests, of a government that thinks you can tax a country into prosperity. It is like trying to stand in a bucket and pull yourself up by the handle. It doesn't work, it looks ridiculous, and eventually the handle snaps. The dead hands analogy is particularly punchy because it suggests that Starmer and Reeves aren't just making mistakes, they are actively stifling the natural green shoots of recovery that the global market is trying to provide. They are the wet blanket on the British campfire, ensuring that no matter how much fuel is added, the flames never take hold.
Yeah, I think I think the idea is that thank goodness George Osborne's no longer still Chancellor. It was bad enough when he was. It's a really good idea at a time when inflation is twice the official target, nudging 4%. It's meant to be 2%. Let's put VAT up. Let's put prices up. Yeah. And what does he think is going to happen? The unions are going to look for pay rises. And what will that do? It'll add to wage inflation. So I think he should stick to podcasts with Mr. Bowles, where they can talk a lot like that there. And I think the VAT, now look, you could widen the incidence of the VAT. In Britain, there are more exemptions than probably any other European country. You could bring the amount of VAT down to where it starts to click in if you're a company and your turnover, the moment I think it's about £80,000. But none of that will bring you in huge sums of money. No. And good luck to the government that says we're going to put VAT on supermarket food now. I really, when you're 15% on the polls, that seems to me to be a stroke of genius to even contemplate doing that. You want to end up at 5% on the polls, be my guest.
So, as we move further into 2026, the political landscape looks less like a stable democracy and more like a scene from a disaster movie where the protagonists are the ones causing the disaster. The hostility isn't just coming from the right-wing press either. The disillusionment is so broad that it spans across the political spectrum. Even former Labour voters are looking at the current state of the NHS, the rail strikes that never seem to end, and the stagnant growth figures, and they are asking, is this it? When your net approval is -66, you aren't just losing the argument, you've lost the room. The Starmer-Reeves brand has become a toxic asset, and Andrew Neil's public humiliation of their record is merely the vocalisation of what millions of voters are saying at their kitchen tables. The demolition is complete. The adults are in the room, but the room is empty, the lights are off, and Andrew Neil just pointed out that they forgot to pay the electricity bill. Whether they can pivot or if they are doomed to be kicked out of office, as Neil predicts, remains the biggest suspense story in British politics. But for now, the verdict is in, the dead hands are firmly on the wheel, and the cliff edge is getting uncomfortably close. Thank you for watching.